Hi everyone, welcome to episode 3 of TEFL Talk, the podcast from Eye to Eye and Love TEFL. My name is Jenny and I will be your host today. I will be guiding you through teaching English in Japan. I work here as an editor and writer. I've taught in England and I've taught in Poland, but I haven't taught in Japan myself. I'm going to need some help today, and that help is coming in the form of my very special guest. His name is Sam. He's taught in Japan and he's going to share all of his knowledge with us this afternoon.
Hi Jenny, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Good to have you with us. We'll be hearing from you a lot in this episode. So would you like to give us a little bit of an intro as to your background teaching in Japan and what you do here at Eye to Eye?
So I taught in Japan between 2018 and 2019 for about a year and a half. I had a fantastic time out there. I was based in Osaka. I got a lot of ability to travel around the country as well as teaching, which was fantastic. Even picked up a little bit of the language as well. I'm currently working with the academic and customer support team at the moment, helping our customers with any technical related issues or academic related issues to do with the course.
Great, thank you so much. And we are very excited to have you here. As a thank you to our lovely listeners, at the end of this episode, we will be giving you a very exclusive promo code that you can use on all Eye to Eye's TEFL courses and internships. So keep listening until the end for that. Okay, so in this first section of the episode, we're going to be answering questions from you guys out there, our listeners. These questions are all about Japan, and our first question comes in from Jessica. She says, is it difficult to get a job teaching with a friend? But if we do go on our own, if we can't get a job with our friend, would there be the opportunity to meet other English speakers out there who are teaching in that area, or would you be all on your own? Well, Jessica, this depends on what you mean by teaching together with a friend. If you're looking to get a job in the same school as your friend, this might be slightly more challenging because it means that the school will have to be recruiting for more than one teacher. Having said that, some schools do prefer to take friends together or a couple together because it means that you're less likely to feel homesick, you're less likely to feel lonely. Sam, you've got a little bit of experience. Do you want to talk about teaching or finding work with a friend or partner?
Yeah, of course. So it also depends on whereabouts you want to be based, Jessica. So if you're in any of the major cities, and there's a variety of them, there you're going to be absolutely swamped with other English teachers. There's a massive global community in a lot of the major cities. If you find yourself out more in the country, this obviously might be a little bit more difficult to find people, but I guarantee that you'll be able to still find, there'll be communities, there'll be small pockets of English speakers dotted around. And as you probably already know, Japanese people are some of the most friendliest people I've ever met. So you won't struggle to find friends anyway. In regards to getting a job with a friend, so some of the major companies that actually employ in Japan, they actually employ they employ people as a couple as well. So I actually went out there with my ex-partner and we were set up in a couple's apartment. We were put into different schools, but that wasn't an issue at all, as long as we were able to live together in the same city. So yeah, that's completely taken care of for you, and it completely works.
Great. Yeah, just to add to that, if you do end up in a smaller city or a town or out in the countryside on your own, it's a really good opportunity for you to integrate into that community. You'll have to work harder than if you're in a big city with lots of expats or other English teachers. But it means that you've got to make the effort to learn the language, to get to know the people, and maybe you'll have more of a wholesome experience.
Okay, so our next question has come from Neil. Thank you, Neil. And he has asked, do you need a degree to teach in Japan? I think it would be quite difficult to get a job without a degree. There are definitely opportunities and availabilities to get jobs without a degree, but the majority of schools and companies do like to have their teachers with some sort of bachelor degree. I think this comes down to Japan being quite a developed country, and they have quite high standards when it comes to qualifications and education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just to point out as well, it doesn't matter what your degree is in. It can be any subject for a BA or a BSc. You'll also need a TEFL certificate to work there. And before you go, you'll need to complete a police check, a medical check, and get your visa from the embassy. So there's lots of paperwork and admin to do before you get to Japan. But when you're there, let's talk a little bit about living costs. This question comes in from Samira. She says, in Japan, what is the pay like in comparison to living costs? So I haven't been to Japan, but in my head, it's very expensive. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about the real answer to this question?
Jenny, you're completely right. Japan is a very, very expensive country. It's not too dissimilar to any of the Western countries, so the UK, America, in terms of prices. That, however, does mean, though, that the salaries are pretty good. So to give you a kind of example, I was paid 270,000 yen a month. This probably sounds like means nothing to you at the moment.
You're a millionaire.
But exactly, lots of money. But to give you a kind of understanding, my rent for my apartment was 80,000 a month. That was a very, very, very expensive because I was given straight over to an English-speaking landlord, and because of that, he could add a premium to his prices. In terms of rent, you can get yourself a really, really good place in the center of a city, whether it be Osaka or Tokyo, anywhere between 40 to 50,000 yen. So if you do the maths from the salary that I had with that amount of rent, it's really quite a livable salary. Something that is quite surprising to a lot of people is that the eating out culture in Japan is very, very popular, and it's actually quite cheap. It's a lot cheaper than you'd imagine. Something that was really, really surprising is that actually groceries amount to be slightly more expensive than in the majority of our home countries. So actually eating out, weirdly enough, it kind of saves a bit of money.
Okay, that's really interesting and good to know because I'm sure there's lots and lots of delicious food out there. Okay, so just for a little bit of context, 270,000 yen works out at about $2,500. So a pretty nice salary, and your rent you were paying about $500. Wow.
So I think that's quite livable. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that's absolutely livable.
Yeah.
That's
I
okay.
mean, there is no question that if you were to go to a Southeast Asian country and teach English there, you'd have a lot more disposable income. But I still think that what you get in Japan is incredibly comfortable.
If you're worried about living cheaply or not having enough money, there are some ways that you can cut your costs. So, for example, Samira, you can eat like a local and make use of all of the delicious food out there, especially if the groceries are slightly more expensive. It might be difficult in Japan to cycle or walk as an alternative to public transport. However, it might be worth looking for jobs which will provide a monthly paid rail pass, which definitely exist. Sam, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of because the Japanese economy thrives on essentially their fantastic public transport, that being the train systems. A lot of the employers are actually obligated to insure you for your commute to work. So they have to provide you with a monthly commuting pass. And that actually means that works all week round. So evenings, weekdays and stuff. So I was very lucky my actual commute was the distance between my residence and my school actually was on the most popular line through Osaka. So it meant that I could jump on and off that line in the evenings and the weekends, and I wasn't spending anything on public transport. Alternatively, you could also get a bike. Cycling is very popular in Japan, and you probably know about the almost zero crime rate. Your bike won't get stolen. Nothing will get stolen. It's a very, very safe country. And yeah, it's another fantastic way to save money.
A couple more things that you can do if you want to are taking on some extra tuition. So you can take on private students around your regular hours, either in person or online. And the best way to cut down on spending is to avoid your flights home where possible. So no sneaky trips home to see your family unless you really have to. Alternatively, ensure that your employers will provide your flights for free at the beginning and end of your contract. Okie doke. So we have spent a lot of time already discussing some different questions from our listeners. However, let's get into the meaty part of today's episode. Salma's going to give us the lowdown on teaching English in Japan from the start to the finish. So prepare yourselves. Sam, let's just go from the beginning. How do you find a job? What is the recruitment process like? Who are they looking for? Can anyone get a job anywhere? Tell us everything you know.
So I got my job through a large corporation. There's about 5 of them, all extremely competitive. They all offer really good salaries, competitive salaries, and just job perks. I went to an interview/workshop day in London after applying with a CV and a cover letter. This day consisted of various activities, training, English tests, and essentially whittled us down to the final few who were eventually offered the job. I think I was flown out by them within the next 3 months, which actually included when I say flown out, they actually included a stipend for the flight, which is another great way to save on money. My company required a degree, and essentially they just required what they're really looking for is just very, very proactive, enthusiastic people that are ready to take on challenges, that are ready to help people, and that can just explain things in a really well detailed manner.
Okay, so these 5 corporate companies, the biggest in Japan for teaching English, they are only looking for teachers from the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, the UK and South Africa. So unless you have a passport from those countries, it's going to be difficult finding a job with these organisations. Having said that, though, there are other institutions and schools that you can work with.
There's an absolute multitude of private institutions, private schools, even public schools that would be willing to take anybody, no matter what background, no matter what passport, granted they hold a suitable level of English.
Mm-hmm. And that's the most important thing, right? You need a degree, you need your TEFL qualification, and you need to be able to prove a proficient level of English in order to get a job in the schools and organisations outside of these 5 corporate schools that Sam talked about. Okay, so the company that employed you flew you to Japan. What happened next?
So one of the main perks of getting employed by these larger companies is that they make that transition into moving and settling into Japan a lot easier. So you can imagine there is a lot of paperwork and administration that needs to be dealt with when you get to Japan. Not being a speaker of the Japanese language, you can imagine that. Well, I found that very, very difficult to do. Luckily, my company took care of a lot of that. So they found my accommodation, they set up my bank account, I think they sorted out my company insured me. I got medical insurance through my company. So all the main stuff that you really, really need to get sorted, and it would be incredibly difficult if you didn't speak Japanese, was already done for me. After that, it was more just the kind of lifestyle side of things that needed to be kind of tackled, which is actually that's part of the experience, and that's just the fun part, isn't it? You know. So, for example, food. Let's talk about food. So I don't know, there might be any vegetarians listening at the moment. I am a vegetarian and whilst I was living in Japan. That was very, very tricky. So I don't think the concept of vegetarianism has quite reached Japan yet. And the idea of not eating all types of meat was something that I really had to get used to quickly, and something that actually pushed my Japanese, because that was one of the first things that I learned to ask is there any type of meat in this? And more often than not, there would be a small segment of some sort of meat in something, whatever I ate. But yeah, that was really interesting. Meeting people, Japanese people are the most friendliest people I've ever met. You'll walk into a restaurant or a bar or a shop, and you'll find more often than not that people want to talk to you. People are actually genuinely interested about you and your background, which is absolutely lovely. So it really, really creates this kind of feeling of a sense of community and just belonging when you're there, which is really, really lovely.
Okay, so it sounds like it was a very promising start to your life in Japan. And can we move on and talk a little bit about the school that you worked for and just give us an overview of the classes you were teaching, the age and the level of your students, what your colleagues were like, or what the resources or the teaching style, or if there was any training, anything like that?
Okay, so I received some training before I went into my school with my company, which was a really great way to meet. I met a lot of my friends through that because that was I think we had our training group was about 20 of us, so we were all fresh faced, very new to Japan. That was a really fun period. And
so these people are people who were employed by the same company but put into different schools?
Yes,
okay.
yes. So my company has many schools all over Japan. These people came from all over the world. So on receiving your training, you are sent to your first school, which granted that your working year goes to plan. You'll stay in that school for the contracted year that you're there. And this is where it gets really interesting because this is where you first start mixing with your Japanese staff members. So the school will be run by Japanese people, and that means that'll be your first interaction into the Japanese business culture, which is really interesting, but very different. There's lots of bizarre customs that you may find very different at first. One of them being presentation is very important. You can't eat or you can't seem to be eating or drinking in front of customers. You can't yawn or look tired. It's all very formal, and the customer or the student in this case is the most important person.
And your students, were they adults or children or
Good question, Jenny. So I taught everyone. I taught a variety. So I had kids classes all the way up to adult classes. I had large classes ranging from up to the numbers of about 20 to individual one-to-one classes.
Okay, and the level of the students, or any comments on their approach to learning English? Is it more focused on writing than on speaking, or?
So the Japanese schooling system is very systematic and grammar based.
Because it's all about passing exams.
Exactly. So the actual system is completely tailored to passing the exams. That's exactly right.
I read that all Japanese children up to high school have to reach a certain level by a certain age. So they're just working towards that exam rather than...
Exactly, that's exactly
English,
right. And it's a very mathematical approach to learning English. As you have to remember as well, whilst these children are having to learn a certain amount of English grammar, which, let's be honest, is not easy, they're also having to learn a certain number of memorizing kanji characters and learning their own language as well. So most Japanese people will hold quite a good level of English grammar. However, their ability to produce that grammar produce that English in a natural setting is something that they find very difficult. So when they come to me most of my classes were more after school, after work kind of setting. When they come to me, they're usually looking just to improve their conversational skills, their fluency, their listening in regards to recognition of words within connected speech, and just their natural ability to use the English language. So grammar was a really low focus for me.
Mm-hmm. And you think this struggle to produce the language that they know on paper, is that down to the schooling, or is it down to something else as well? I'm just thinking about not wanting to make a fool of yourself or embarrassing yourself. I want to talk a little bit about Japanese pride.
Yeah, I think, Jen, you've nailed it right there. That's fantastic. So yeah, it's a bit of both. It's definitely a 50-50 split. So obviously I think the schooling system is, a little bit too focused on grammar and not enough on producing and speaking. So there's a huge cultural aspect on... if anything, maybe a bit too much around kind of shame culture in making a mistake. So a lot of my students were terrified of making a mistake. So it's, I think the culture is almost like, don't do anything unless you are a master of it. And obviously everybody knows that once you start learning, if you're not a native speaker of that language, you're never going to be a master of it. You're going to be learning. I think I'm still learning English myself.
Still learning English, and
yeah,
you know what? I still make mistakes.
exactly.
I'm human.
And that's how you learn. And that one of my jobs was to kind of just make these people feel comfortable in this classroom, in this, make it a safe space almost for them to make mistakes. Mistakes are fantastic. We learn from mistakes.
Exactly. Okay, so to wrap up this segment, I'm just going to ask you about your overall pros and cons of life in Japan. It sounds like you had a very wonderful time. Any closing statements and summaries, please?
So I did. I had a fantastic time. I think that the pros outweigh the cons massively, and I would recommend this experience to anybody that was looking to teach English as a foreign language. Japan is an absolutely wonderful culture, wonderful mixture of the past and the future merged together in a fantastic global community with its iconic culture and food and welcoming people. Yeah, it's something I really recommend to anybody looking for that experience.
And the Olympics coming up as well.
It's very true, yeah. So it's definitely on the world stage at the moment with the Rugby World Cup last year and the Olympics this year. It's definitely the sort of country that you'd want to go to at the moment.
Okay, so thank you so much. That wraps up our main chunk of the episode, all about teaching English in Japan. I hope we've covered lots of your questions and queries. In this next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about one of our top TEFL tips, which is something that I think stresses out a lot of new, inexperienced TEFL teachers. We've all been there, and that is dealing with difficult questions from your students. Now, for me, these questions fall into two categories. You've got language questions, so any questions to do with grammar or vocabulary, or teacher, why does this do this? And you just think, oh, I don't know. I don't know everything, not yet. So that's one type of question. The other type of question is questions that you just don't want to answer because they're too personal, they're controversial, they're asking your opinion on something that you don't really want to share in a public place, for example, or they're asking you about your love life or your relationships, and you just don't want to talk about that in front of a class full of teenagers. I've got lots of experience of being asked these sorts of questions, and I thought we'd just talk through some ways of dealing with them, or give you some advice if you ever find yourself in this situation. But Sam, have you ever come across or encountered some difficult questions from your students in the classroom?
Yeah. So I think the two example questions that you just said were I had a lot of those questions posed towards me, and the advice that I would give, particularly number one, if you're ever having to deal with a difficult grammar question that you don't know the answer to, which will happen, that's inevitable. You don't know everything. No one knows everything. Honesty. So you tell your students that maybe you don't know that at the moment. You'll look it up and go home, research it, get back the next week, and give them the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I would say, try and give the answer as soon as you can. If you can do it within the lesson, if you set your students a writing task or a listening task, while that recording's playing, see if you can Google it, look it up in a reference book in your classroom, and try and get the answer to them later on in the lesson if you can. Or if your lessons have a break, you can always go to your colleagues. In the breaks, they might have some idea of what the answer is. My problem, because I've got a terrible memory, is that if I say I'll answer this next week, is I will totally forget and the question will never get answered. So if you're going to ask that question, frame it, I want to research this, I want to make sure what I'm saying is correct before I give you it, I want to give you the best possible answer, and then write it in numerous places on your hand, put a reminder in your phone, and don't forget to go back to that student, because I guarantee that student won't have forgotten. But the main thing to remember is that, your students aren't expecting you to know everything. It's impossible to know everything. And even if you're very, very experienced and you know tons about grammar, there's always something that will catch you off guard. Why is depend on followed by on and not by? And you think, I don't know, it just is. And that's one of the hardest things to answer, when you just think the answer is, well, it just is, that's just English. But trust me, there's always a rule. Look it up in a book. Okay, so the second type of question that we talked about, we've got the grammar questions, and then we've got inappropriate or personal questions. Can you give us a couple of examples of this and how you deal with it, Sam?
Yes. So again, this is another example of questions that I was asked a lot when I was in Japan. So particularly one of the most popular questions were about my personal love life. So younger female students asking me about whether I have a girlfriend or not.
Which you did.
Exactly, yeah. So and just there's that you are likely to get a lot of questions that are going to make you feel a bit uncomfortable, and that quite frankly the students shouldn't be asking you. If they are making you feel uncomfortable, I think a great way to deal with this is you can preempt it. So maybe at the start of your curriculum, the start of your classes, you can set out some rules. You can lay out some rules and just say, look, let's keep this as an English zone. I'm a teacher, you are the students. I don't really want those kind of questions asked of me. You could maybe talk to your school director or your manager or line manager and just maybe get them to take the students aside just to let them know. Maybe if they hear it in their native language, it might come across a bit more directly. They might understand a bit better.
Yeah, exactly. I had some questions on my love life, but I also taught a lot of adult students in business contexts. I had a lot of questions about politics, about topics like immigration, and sometimes I just didn't feel comfortable talking about it in the classroom. You can frame this as, I'm really sorry, I appreciate that you're interested in my points of view, but I'm not here to talk about my opinions on that topic. Or you can say, look, I've got a lot to get through in this lesson. I've planned the lesson. I want to keep close to the lesson plan, and sort of go around it that way. We've got a lot to do today. Let's not talk about the Prime Minister. And like Sam said, you've got to establish your boundaries. Sometimes, especially if your students are a similar age or around your age, you might feel a little bit like your friends, but I would say keep that outside of the classroom if that's something that your school allows. But within the classroom, not everybody in that class cares about your personal life or political views. So just because of one or two people are asking, you don't have to talk about it. However, having said that, if there is something that you're happy to talk about, you can use it as an opportunity to introduce new language to your students, which is ultimately the goal of the lesson. Okay, so we are nearly there. We're nearly at the end of the episode. We're nearly at that delicious promo code that I promised you. But it's time for a short story. Sam, would you like to entertain us? You've got 1 minute on the clock.
Okay, so when I first got to Japan, I noticed that their consumption of plastic was quite bad. Being a bit of an environmentalist myself, I wanted to reduce my consumption of plastic. Therefore, I tried to learn as best as I could phrases to say, I don't need a plastic bag, no thank you. After around about 2 to 3 months of saying this phrase, which I thought meant I do not need a plastic bag, I was told by a very friendly Japanese person that the word for bag in Japanese is very, very, very similar to the word owl, as in the night bird. So unbeknownst to me, I was actually going around various Japanese stores telling the assistants there that I did not need an owl from them. So yeah, I thought that was quite a funny anecdote, and just something to look out for if you're going there to learn a bit of Japanese and you're a little bit environmentally conscious as well.
Yeah, very nice. Lots of bemused, amused shop assistants probably going, well, I wasn't going to give you an owl anyway. This is a greengrocer's. Okay, so thank you so much. That brings us to the end of episode 3 of TEFL Talk, the exclusive and collaborative podcast from I2I and Love TEFL. So time for that promo code that I promised you at the beginning of the episode. So to get 5% off any I2I course or internships, even if there is already a discount on that product, use the promo code TEFL Talk 5 when you go to the checkout, but this promo code will only work for a limited time. So thank you so much to everybody for listening, and if you've got any questions about TEFL or you want to contact us here in the studio, please email us. You can email us at tefltalk@teachandtravelgroup.com. As always, the longest email address in the history of the world, that is tefltalk@teachandtravelgroup.com. Episode 4 will be coming to you shortly, and if you want to stay in the loop, sign up to the TEFL Talk newsletter at tefltalkpodcast.com. Who knew we had a website? My goodness. That email address, we'll make sure that it's in the show notes because it's a long one, so you can copy and paste it from there. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.
We've been talking TEFL talk, talking TEFL with TEFL talk. We've been talking TEFL talk, talking TEFL with TEFL talk. TEFL talk.